To millions lives a dead tadpoles. It hardly enters your mind that there's something better than this.
Did you know that you can play hundreds upon hundreds of retro games on the console that you already own? Especially if that system is the Nintendo Switch? Well guys, here we are at the third and final video on the best and most efficient ways to get into retro gaming in 2025 and beyond. In the previous videos we took a detailed look at emulation handhelds and devices as well as the Evercade family of systems as two of the three most efficient ways to get into retro gaming in this day and age. If you have a Switch, PS4, PS5 or even an Xbox, yet somehow you haven't gotten into retro gaming yet, there is no need to look any further. This right here might just be the single best, most efficient way to get into retro gaming if you already own one of these platforms, especially the Nintendo Switch. In this portion of the video, I will focus on the Nintendo Switch due to its portable nature, which lends itself perfectly for pick-up and play retro games. The Nintendo Switch has a ton of retro games released for it both in physical and digital format. From arcade games to console games, the Switch is an absolute treasure trove of retro gaming. Now, one of the more difficult aspects to understand about modern gaming platforms for many people, despite it being more and more common since the late 2000s, is the digital distribution of games. Many people in my country tend to have difficulties wrapping their minds around this. Many people don't know how to purchase digital games and so on. While this is definitely less and less of an issue for most people, I still consider it a hurdle that some people might have to overcome when it comes to accessibility to retro gaming or gaming in general. So guys, if you or somebody else you know has this issue and you just can't get into this digital distribution thing, don't worry, the Switch has a ton of physical retro games released for it. In fact, one of the most important compilations of retro games, the Sega Genesis Mega Drive Classic compilation of games, was recently delisted, meaning removed for good from all online stores, including the Switch eShop. So the only way for you to buy this amazing compilation of games is by buying the, fortunately still very affordable, physical copy of the game. The Nintendo Switch has a huge library of shmups, arcade games, console retro games, and so on released in physical form. For example, the Disney Classic Games collection contains the Genesis and SNES Aladdin games, Lion King, and Jungle Book. Incredible shmups such as Batsugan, Trigger Heart Celica, and so on are available on the system in physical form. There are modern remasters or remakes of classic titles such as the Ninja Warriors remaster, which retains its amazing pixel art roots but has a fresh coat of paint and looks absolutely incredible on the Switch. Toki, the arcade game, is also on the Switch, remade with brand new graphics, but it retains its old school gameplay. We also have the absolutely incredible, breathtaking Wonder Boy Dragonstrap remake, which lets the player switch between the classic and old school visuals and the incredibly breathtaking, amazing modern graphics. This is also the case with Alex Kidd. Sonic Origins, which includes 3 Mega Drive games, is also available in physical form on the Nintendo Switch, though its extra games are unfortunately DLC digital only. Most importantly, the Switch as well as other modern platforms have the incredible, absolutely phenomenal Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga collection. This alone, in my opinion, should be enough to start you with retro gaming on these modern platforms. From Neo Geo to NES and everything in between, you can find all kinds of digital and physical releases on the Switch. So guys, all you have to do is buy yourself a nice arcade stick and you will have a wonderful makeshift home arcade system right there. What's even better is that the arcade ports on Nintendo Switch give the player full freedom and control of deep switches, which, as we already discussed, was a huge problem with the Evercade family of systems where deep switches have been removed or restricted. Now, sadly, not all games are available for all modern consoles. For example, 3 of the absolute best shoot-'em-ups are only available on PS4 and PS5 right now. That's Danganronpa, Battle Garega, and Ketsui. And I don't think they're ever going to make it to the Switch, at least not anytime soon. The Disney Afternoon Collection, which is an absolutely great collection and includes DuckTales 2 and Chip and Dale 2, is also exclusive for the PS4. So guys, things are looking very good for the Switch and other modern platforms. There's an abundance of all kinds of retro games that you can buy both digitally and physically. So what exactly are the negatives? There is one huge, enormous problem with modern platforms, especially when it comes to digital distribution, and that is the delisting or complete removal of games from online storefronts. This is a huge problem because when a game is removed, those who purchased it can usually download it as many times as they want and keep playing it even if they delete it because it's tied to their account, but no new users can buy it. Unfortunately, in their absolute infinite greed, developers and publishers or license holders will find any excuse to delist or remove a game at some point. And there's nothing you can do about it. What's worse is corporate shills who don't think for themselves sometimes even defend these practices. But most people do find them very bothersome. And this happened, as I already said, with the Sega Mega Drive Classics collection, and unfortunately it also happened with one of the best shoot-'em-ups of all time, and that is Mushihime-sama for the arcades. Fortunately, both Mushihime-sama and the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis Classics collection still have affordable physical versions on the Switch, so people can still buy those. But when those versions stop being as common, they're going to skyrocket in price, they're going to become very expensive on the second-hand market, and you will have to pay scalpers and resellers insane amounts of money just to play these games on a Switch or any other modern platform. So this right here is a huge problem with the modern gaming platforms, including the Nintendo Switch. To make things even more complicated and anti-consumer, many of these physical releases are either limited print games, have to be imported from Asia or Japan, or simply had small print runs, and they become very expensive on the second-hand market. This leads us back to the emulation devices and the fact that they might just be the best platform for retro gaming if you just learn how to maintain them and how to add your own games to them. Now, there is one aspect of modern retro gaming that I purposely did not mention until now, and that is because I wanted you to focus on games that you can actually own, whether physically or digitally. However, there is a huge shift with these greedy companies such as Nintendo and so on in creating rental retro game platforms similar to streaming services such as Netflix. Nintendo are already doing this nonsense with their yearly subscription for Nintendo Online, meaning that if you pay $20 a year, you can play online as well as have access to NES, Game Boy, and SNES games, which is honestly not all that expensive. However, if you want access to Game Boy Advance and N64 games as well, you better pony up and pay another 20 or 30 bucks for a total of $60 in order to rent out games that you don't even own that Nintendo add to their meager tiny collection of ROMs every once in a blue moon. So while these online services are pretty much as accessible as it gets for just about anyone, there's no learning curve, there's no nothing, they're just not the right way to access retro games in my opinion. So that's why it's best to learn to maintain your own emulation devices so that you can provide your own games and play them on your own time at your own leisure without being tied to online services. Now guys, let's take a look at the pros and cons of choosing a Nintendo Switch or a modern platform for retro gaming. Now the first positive aspect, first pro, would be many retro games from console to arcade games have physical and digital releases on these systems that you can actually buy and own on your accounts. Arcade games usually offer full access to deep switches. Pairing the Switch with a nice arcade stick goes a long way into having your own makeshift arcade, and with the system's portability, being able to play both horizontal and vertical games on the fly is simply amazing. And finally, there is absolutely no learning curve required for you to get into retro gaming on Nintendo Switch or any of the other modern day gaming platforms. Now the negatives we already discussed, but publishers and developers will and can remove games from modern online stores. Physical copies of games can become very scarce, expensive on the second-hand market. Nintendo would rather rent you NES, SNES, GBA, and N64 games rather than sell you these games to own on your account like they did back in the Wii days. So guys, now that you have a good idea of what options you have out there for easily getting into retro gaming in 2025 and beyond, the decision is ultimately up to you on which method you want to take to get into retro games. So just have fun, be sure to explore your retro gaming and learn about all kinds of games that you might have missed or overlooked over the years. Because there's just so much to play and see out there, especially nowadays with retro gaming being more accessible than it ever has been.